Everybody listening? Hi. I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Historical Society. My name's Cricket. I am the secretary. Cricket. Yes, my nickname. I only have a few announcements tonight. We want to thank Ron Hale and Tim Judd for bringing refreshments. And if anybody would like to sign up to help at a future meeting, there's a sign-up sheet at the back table with Ron. Let's see. We might have some openings on our board of directors for next year. If anyone is interested in learning more, you can ask any one of the board members. I'm one, Ron Hale's one, Deb, she's waving her hand back there, she's on the board. Thank you. Let's see. Our meeting next month is going to be presented by staff at the Irondequoit Beer Company. They will be coming here to talk about the growth of microbreweries in Rochester, specifically the Irondequoit Beer Company. And I think that all three of the main investors in it will be here: Mike Nolan, Leslie DeCesar, and Nate Custer. And now I'm going to introduce our speaker.
Are they bringing samples?
Oh, I wish. We'd have a good turnout.
You would.
All right. Our speaker tonight is Jim Hinman. I've known Jim since high school, so it's quite a while.
About 15 years.
Yeah, that's it.
Roughly.
He graduated from Irondequoit High School. He studied history at Gettysburg College and law at Syracuse University. He graduated from Syracuse in 1980 and began his legal practice in 1981 after passing the bar exam. Now, I found out that Jim is a superhero, that you have a cape you should be wearing.
Oh, really?
Yes, I heard you were selected to Super Lawyers.
Oh, yeah.
For, yes.
For $350, they'll send you a plaque at a One of my colleagues posted on Facebook his super lawyer thing just the other day. So I saw him last night at an event, and I said, "So I see you paid the money." He said, "No, I just took a photo shot of the certificate and posted that." I'm like, "Okay, I'll do that in the future."
Save some money.
Save some money.
Right. Well, I think you're super anyway.
Well, thanks.
Yeah. Jim is the chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals. And I'll be honest, I didn't really know what the zoning board did. So I looked it up. And it said on the website that they hear and decide appeals regarding code enforcement and building permit decisions. Like if you wanted to install a 6-foot-high fence and that's taller than you would normally be allowed, you would present something to Jim and the rest of the board. And I'm sure you must have some good stories about that.
Oh, we do.
Jim and his wife continue to live in West Irondequoit. He enjoys camping. He watches the Amerks and the Bills. He's been involved in scouting for over 50 years. And he is a past president of Irondequoit United Church of Christ. And he's also a proud cancer survivor.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to welcome Jim. And one little add-in. When we're all done, there's refreshments at the back. Okay?
Thank you. Never in my life did I figure that I could get a crowd like this to listen to something about zoning. I mean, until I went to law school, I had no idea what zoning was. And I took the course, and the course actually was taught by the guy who literally wrote the book on American land use planning and zoning and New York land use and planning. And I took that course. And then I thought, well, I'm never going to use this again. And then my first job, I went to work for a small firm where 2 of the lawyers did mostly municipal work. So I spent the entire summer between 2nd and 3rd year law school doing nothing but working on zoning and municipal law cases. And then we did a little more after that, and then it kind of went by the wayside. And then when the, trying to think of her name, supervisor.
Mary Ellen?
Yes, thank you. I think it was about 17 years ago, maybe. I was asked, would you be interested in, well, actually I put in for the deputy town attorney job, which is limited to the term that the supervisor has because, you know, politics, Democrats are in, and you're a Republican, you're out. If you're a Democrat or you're a Republican and the Democrats are in, you're out. So then I was asked, well, would you like to be on the zoning board? And I said, sure, that'd be fun. And here 17 years later, I'm still on the zoning board. And there's another member of the board who started a year after me. And the rest have come, we've had some come and go and in between. It's a wonderful experience. What I love most about being on the zoning board is that after we decide an application, especially if we, well, only if we grant it, because generally, if we don't grant it, nothing changes. But when we grant an application that somebody presents to us, you can drive around town and you can see, oh, look what they've done. That's really nice. We approve that. And I'll say that 98% of the things that we approve bring favorable responses. There is one in particular that just about once a week, I am reminded of that it was not such a good idea. And that is whenever my wife has run into a traffic situation at Ridge and Portland with Dunkin' Donuts. Who let them build that there? Do you know how much that holds up traffic?
It does.
Yes, I know. And yes, and we, like I said, we regularly hear about it. However, when I go through a lot of the criteria that we have to take into consideration, I hope, maybe not, you'll understand why we approve that. So let's start with, there's a fundamental principle that goes back to medieval times, and that is a man's home is his castle, or I should say a person's home is their castle. And that was the common view. Whatever you wanted to do on your property, you could do. And whatever your neighbor wanted to do on their property, they could do. And then around the turn of the century from 1800s to 1900s, it started to say, you know, there's certain things that don't really belong next to each other. Like a brewing company next to an elementary school. You know, that really isn't a good mix. So municipalities started passing zoning laws. And basically what a zoning law is, you take the boundaries of the municipality and you divide it into certain zones. And in certain zones, you allow certain things. So you might allow, you know, manufacturing, businesses, then residential, and, you know, you might set aside something for parks, and this might be, say, an adult area, where only adult businesses like bars and things like that would be allowed, so that you have separation and you don't have a convenience store or a grocery store between two single-family residences. Can you imagine having your house next to Wegmans? Most people would say, no, well, the town zoning ordinance doesn't allow that. And of course, like everything that gets passed that limits anybody's rights, this got challenged in the courts. And in 1926, the Supreme Court, in a case called, what was the name of it? Village of Euclid, which is in Ohio, versus Amber Realty Company, the Supreme Court said, yes, you can do that, as long as it's reasonable, uniformly applied, and it's not an unconstitutional taking of property. Because the claim that was being made was against the Euclid was, you have to pay me for the property because you're telling me I can't use it the way I want to. So you have to pay me under the Constitution, I think it's the 8th Amendment that says if the government takes property, eminent domain, that they have to pay the value of the property. So this realty company was suing the town of Euclid saying, you owe us this money for the property. And the Supreme Court said, no, that's okay as long as it's done within these guidelines. And so initially it started out to bring like some sense and some order to development within the boundaries of a municipality. Now, one of the problems that you run into is, so if this is municipality A, well, what about municipality B? That is right next door. So if you've got a residential district in municipality A, and municipality B says, well, this is where we're putting our manufacturing, does that decrease the value of your property in municipality A? Probably. So, but that requires intermunicipality cooperation. How many of you think that that exists today? All right. But in zoning matters, that's one of the things that we try and take into consideration is where it, and the example that I'll offer up is the project down at the bottom of St. Thomas Avenue, I mean. Right there where it meets, it used to be Pattonwood. Yeah, it's Stutson Street on the other side. That property is in Irondequoit up until a certain point, and then it's the city. And we had a developer who wanted to build a development in there. And I'll get to that later, that specific one. But on the other side of it was the city of Rochester. So we only had the ability to say something about what was taking place in Irondequoit, and they had to go through a very similar process with the city to get the city's approval to put the other part of it up, which I think eventually they did. And so this principle of a person's home is their castle is contradicted by the NIMBY philosophy. Anybody know what NIMBY stands for? Not in my backyard, right. Everybody thinks that a lot of things are great and that we ought to do this, we should do more of this, this is a terrific thing as long as it's not in my backyard. Right? And one of the things that really brought that to the forefront was the idea of putting residential homes for developmentally disabled and troubled youth in residential neighborhoods. And it got to the point where local municipalities, zoning boards, planning boards, town boards were denying the ability to install those. So the federal government, as is their wont, took it over and said, hey, you have to let them. It's kind of the same thing with those cell phone towers. Remember a few years ago, the town had a big controversy over the cell phone tower over at St. Paul, and the town board didn't want it there, and they denied it, and so Verizon sued them. Well, there's a federal law. And basically what those federal laws now say is they can put it wherever they want, as long as they justify the location. And Verizon said that's where it needs to be to have the maximum exposure with the fewest number of towers. So zoning has nothing to do with that. That's taken over by the feds. And that happens sometimes as well with some of these things that we deal with. So how about Irondequoit? Well, I went looking, and one of the former members of the board who retired and moved out of town about 2 weeks before I was scheduled to do this originally, last March, this package arrives in the mail from him. He says, I thought you might be interested in these. This is the 1954 zoning board booklet for the town of Irondequoit, and this is the 1965 zoning board booklet for the town of Irondequoit. Now, what's interesting about this is that in 1954, the zoning ordinance was 22 pages long, small pages, like this. In 1965, the zoning ordinance went from pages, let's see, 5501 up to 5544. So it went from the 22 pages up to the 44 pages. And then the other day I went on the town website and I printed out today's zoning ordinance, okay? And I printed it on 2 sheets to a page to try and conserve paper. It is now 189 pages of regulations, 190 pages of zoning regulations. So that's what happens over time. And what is it that we're talking about? And let me give you a contrast here. 1954, the zoning ordinance created 3 types of districts. Residential districts as a category. B, business districts as a category. A, industrial district. So we had 3 districts in the town: residential, industrial, and business. By 1965, we have residential districts, R1, R2, and R3, R4, R5, R6, commercial district, business district, commercial waterfront, manufacturing district, and then those are the districts in 1965. Today's ordinance. We have all kinds of districts. First off, the definitions in the zoning ordinance take up the first 21 pages, defining all the terms. They got a lot of lawyers working on that. So what districts do we have now? RR, R1, R2, R3, R4, R5, R6, R7, business districts, C and WD, only still 1 manufacturing district, open space districts, environmental protection overlay districts with subcategories of wetland, steep slope, woodlot, tree lot, floodplain, watercourse protection, coastal erosion area protection. We have the LaSalle's Landing Development District. We have the River Harbor District, and I didn't even know this one until I pulled it up, Tourism and Resort Development District. I have no idea what that is, all right? But over the last, then I pulled out, let's take a look at, when these things have changed. So in 1996, there was an amendment to the 1965 ordinance. Then in 1997, there were 2 amendments to the zoning ordinance. In 1968, there were another 2. Then they left it alone until 2000, passed another amendment. And then there were several in 2004. There were 6 in 2005, 1 in 2007. So every year, pretty much, there's some amendment to the zoning board. One of the amendments that I'm familiar with is the amendment that allowed for the erection of windmills in town, right? And perhaps you know where the 2 windmills are that are in town right now. And that was the subject of one of our hearings a couple of years ago, was about the windmills. And so what we had at that meeting was a large number of people came to that meeting. And there was one group that was talking all about how windmills are terrific, they are the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then there were other people saying, windmills don't belong in Irondequoit, this is ridiculous. And what I had to explain to them was, that's not what we're here for. The town board has already passed a law that says windmills are okay. But what they said was, this is where you can put them. And what we had to decide was whether or not we would allow I Square to put their windmills in back of the building, or whether they had to be plopped down in the sidewalk in front of it. That's what was in front of us. Not, are windmills a good idea or a bad idea, but where can they be? And that's one of the things that zoning does, is when they put in all these restrictions, these apply uniformly, but they don't apply well to every piece of property.
Quick question, was farming considered manufacturing? Is that how that was zoned in the past, or?
No, because farming isn't part of the zoning ordinance, because prior to 1954, there were a lot of farms in Irondequoit. And then they passed the zoning ordinance. So there's a concept in zoning that's called a pre-existing non-conforming use. And a pre-existing non-conforming use can continue on and on and on forever, no matter what the zoning says, as long as it continues. If it doesn't continue for a year or more, then you gotta comply with the zoning ordinance. So if you kept farming year after year after year, it didn't matter what zoning district you were in, you're good to farm, right? But as we all know, there aren't many farms left in Irondequoit now. Are there any?
I don't know what's in the flats.
Not any that would fall under the agricultural law.
No, there's no farms in the flats. The last one that I knew of was off of St. Paul, a small one, and they had I can't think.
Johnny Oldenburg.
Oldenburg, yes, that's the last one that I was aware of.
What about Amos? Is that a farm?
No.
Not anymore.
And
Oh, wait a minute.
Case, no, neither is case, because agricultural law, you have to provide most of your income, which means over half, from the farming operation, and they actually purchase and resell.
Okay, all right. So anyway, you know, there's no farming district in Irondequoit. So, all right, what the zoning ordinance basically does is it says, it divides the municipality into zones, districts. And then it says what uses are permitted within that district. And each district of those districts that I read off for you to the current code has a specific list of what is allowed in each district. The most restrictive is the R1 residential district. And that is pretty much limited to single-family homes and firehouses and schools. Now, it was recently pointed out to me that there's apparently some issue over whether private schools or public schools, some differentiation perhaps in the way the ordinance is written. We'll get back to that later. But if you want to use your property and it's located in a district where the use isn't permitted, you either can't do it, or you come to the board, our board, and ask for a variance. That would be a use variance. Then we have a different kind of variance, is the area variance. Because in the zoning board, or in the districts, there are various requirements in terms of how big the buildings can be, what percentage of the lot they can take, that kind of thing. So you own a piece of property. And the town will say, well, you have to have 5 feet side setback, and you have to have a 30-foot rear setback and a 30-foot front setback, for example, all right? Well, now what they're saying is, this is where you can build whatever it is that you want to build. Because it has to be 5 feet on each side, 30 feet front and back. Now, if you have a lot that is, you know, if this is a 60-foot lot and you don't have a 60-foot lot, you have a 40-foot lot. Well, now what happens, you know, on a 60-foot lot, your house could be 50 feet across. But when you're down to a 40-foot lot, it's a 30-foot across. And if you have a 30-foot lot, you're down to 20. And pretty soon you get to the point, the smaller your lot is, the smaller your house can be. And if your house is going to be so small that it's going to cost you more than what the fair market value for it would be, does that make sense to build a house? No. So what do? Well, you come in front of the zoning board and you say, I would like an area variance. And an area variance allows you to build closer to the side or closer to the back or taller than what the zoning requirement is for the height of buildings, which generally got raised, just recently got raised, I understand, from 25 feet to 30 feet. And now you can be 30 feet tall, your structure. So if you need to, because of your lot size or whatever, and the most recent one that came to us was down in Somerville on the terraces, right? Have you been down there? These lots are like, they're narrower than this room, right? And they started out as tents that were used in the summer, and then they winterized them or, you know, protected them so they could use them more often. And then eventually some of them turned into sort of houses. Somebody recently referred to one as a shack, all right? And we recently had someone who came in and he had one of these smaller lots and he wanted to build a house on it. And the house that he bought, that was on it when he bought the property, had a dirt floor and was falling apart, holes in the walls. So he demolished it, and now he wants to build a 2-story house, and a new house. And it's gonna have 3 bedrooms, and it's a nice layout and everything, and he wants to put a driveway in with a garage in his house so that a car can fit in the driveway, another in the garage. Because if you've ever been down there, the parking on the street is horrendous. And people are parked there and it's a terrible situation. But next door to him was a guy whose house was built kind of like this. And the zoning ordinance said that his house had to be like this. And the owner of this property wanted to be able to build his house like that. This neighbor had installed solar panels on the roof. And he was very upset that we might allow him to build this house, which would cast shadows on his solar panel and reduce his ability to realize a gain from installing these solar panels. Now, there was a problem here. The big problem was we weren't being asked to let this guy build a house taller than what the code allowed. That wasn't the issue. The issue was, how close did he need to be to the side? 5 feet. And what did he want to build? 5 feet from the side. And he wanted to be 20 feet from the back instead of 30. And he wanted to be closer to the street than what the front setback allowed. And several neighbors came in opposed to this plan. But then I asked the guy who owned this lot, I said, well, tell me, from the map and the aerial photo, it looks to me like what he wants to build is as close to the back as your place and as close to the front as your place. So can you help me understand where the problem is? He just wants to build a house the same dimensions, and if he had a lot that was bigger, as big as yours, then he wouldn't even need these variances. We granted the variance. The neighbor was not happy. But we've frequently had situations where a large group of people will come in opposed to a variance that we're considering. And as I remind people, if it was a question of whether or not the neighbors approved, we wouldn't need a zoning board. We'd just send out a poll, tell us yes or no, send it back, the town could tally it up, and if the neighbors approved, you could do it, and if the neighbors said no, you couldn't do it. But that's not how it works. The way it works is there are standards that the law has established that we have to take into consideration in deciding whether or not to grant these variances. And there's 4 types of things that we deal with. Area variances, which I've just explained, use variances, then we get into special use permits. They're a different animal. And no pun intended, because the most common special use permit that we deal with almost every month is chickens. Chickens and hens and goats and pigeons. The pigeons is an interesting one. Gentleman overlooking the bay in East Irondequoit filed a variance application to be allowed to harbor 16 pigeons in a coop in his backyard. And one of the things that we do as members of the zoning board is we go out and look at the properties that pertain to these variances applications. So I drove to this guy's house one day and I was looking from the front and I couldn't tell where it was that he wanted to put the coop. So I rang the doorbell. And this woman comes to the door. Can I help you? I said, yes, I'm from the zoning board. I said, I'm here to look at where you want to put the coop for the pigeons. Coop? Pigeons? We're not having any pigeons here. And I'm like, well, there's an application that was submitted to put a coop in your backyard to house 16 pigeons. No, we're not having any pigeons here, and she slams the door. When we got to the meeting the following Monday night, we were told that the application had been withdrawn. So there are certain people that can overrule any application. So what do we take into account when we're considering an area variance? We have to look at the character of the neighborhood. And in the context of, Somerville, it's a residential neighborhood for the most part. And it's a changing and evolving neighborhood. If you go down there and drive up and down the terraces there, you're going to see that there's a number of new construction houses, single-family residences, and then there's other residences that you can tell have been there for quite a long time. And we also have to look at what are the available alternatives. Can you build the house in a way that you don't need a variance? If you don't need it, we're not going to grant it, because these variances that we grant run with the land. And that means that, sometimes people will say, oh, my neighbor, he's impeccable in maintaining his property, and he does a really good job, and we don't have any concerns about what he wants to do on the property. And that's fine, as long as he's there. But if he sells to somebody who is less than impeccable and does not care, then he can still do that, because we've said it's okay to do it on that property. It's not specific to the owner. It relates to the property and it runs in perpetuity with the land. The other thing that we have to take into account is the physical and environmental conditions in the neighborhood. Is this going to, if we allowed a convenience store to go into a residential neighborhood with neon signs and gas pumps and everything else, don't you think that'd have a pretty major impact on the neighborhood? Sure would, right? We had an application off of Portland Avenue. The owner of that property, the white old building with the nice big red barn that's next to it and some outbuildings in the back. Well, a guy bought that who has a real collection of cars. And he's got cars stored in those outbuildings, and he modified the barn to be able to store cars. And he's got more cars. And he came to us and said, I'd like to put up a big building to store my cars behind those outbuildings. And my design is that I'm gonna have you been to New York City and seen those things in the parking lots where they can stack 3 or 4 cars on top of you? Well, that's what he wanted to do in this building, was stack, like 3 cars at a time going all across with this humongous building. And I said to him, well, when you sell it, which you will eventually, we're going to get an application from somebody who says, well, because of the way this building is set up with all these lifts and everything, I want to put in an auto repair shop. And we don't want that. Not there. That's a property that can still be developed into some form of residential use, which is what the neighborhood is about. It's a residential neighborhood. So we denied that application. And we did that because of the fact that it would have a tremendous impact on the physical and environmental conditions. It was also a substantial variance that he was asking for. And how big or small the variance is another factor that we take into account. And then the last factor is kind of an amorphous little one. Is this self-created? Is the hardship self-created? Right? Well, there's different approaches to that. You can take the approach of, well, that was the way it was when they bought the property, so they bought the property knowing that's the way it was, so isn't that a self-created hardship now that they don't want to change it somehow? But there are the other view of that is, well, that's the way the property is, but this is a hardship as a practical matter. And the fact that it's a self-created hardship doesn't necessarily mean that you can't get a variance. So that's kind of like the gray area, right? It's kind of murky. But basically the bottom line is, if you want to challenge, and I'm skipping ahead here, but I'll get back to the variances. If you want to challenge the decision that we made, you have 4 months to bring an Article 78 proceeding, which is a special kind of proceeding in Supreme Court, and a judge will review our decision. These are the criteria that the judge has to take into account. Was our decision arbitrary? Was it capricious? And does it lack a substantial basis in the record? So if you watch our meetings, what you will see is that we make a motion. I move that we approve the variance as submitted based upon the following facts. And then we make specific factual findings. And those factual findings are all designed to withstand any legal challenge to our decision. a judge can't just say, I don't think you should have done that, so I'm gonna set it aside. If there's support in the record, if our findings are backed up by things that were presented to us, then they have to approve it, sustain it whether they want to or not. It doesn't get into what their opinion is. And so we make that, but we also do that in order to explain ourselves, not only to the applicant, but also to the people who have come either in support or in opposition to the application, because we're a municipal body. And, the times I've been chairman now, I think for about, 12, 13 years, something like that. And I was told, we limit the presentations to 3 minutes. If you've watched any of our meetings, you will see that I have never limited anyone. They can talk as long as they want, but they only get one time to talk, they can't come back up for a second round. Because my feeling is, this is a town body. The people who come in front of us are town residents. They deserve to be heard. We have an obligation to listen. We don't have an obligation to agree with them, but we do have an obligation to listen to them and take into account what it is they would like us to consider. And so I let them go as long as they would like. And we haven't run into too many problems with that, although I will tell you that we have had meetings that have gone on until midnight. And we start at 7. My first meeting, 17, 18 years ago, however long it was, my wife said to me, how long do you think you'll be? I said, well, there's only one thing on the agenda. It'll probably be an hour. We were there until midnight. It was Jack Harriman's application for the gas pumps out in front. That's a use variance, right? Because gas stations weren't allowed. So for a use variance allows for a use to be put into one of those districts that is prohibited in the district. And with the gas pumps, they were not allowed in the district that Stutson Street Plaza is in. So in order to get the variance, the applicant has to establish that they cannot realize a reasonable rate of return on their investment in the property without the variance. And that's dollars and cents proof. And it took us hours to pry the dollars and cents proof out of the applicant, because he didn't want to tell us how much he wasn't making and how much he could make with the gas pumps, and didn't want to really explain to us what the profit margin, which is surprisingly low, is on a gallon of gas and all of that. And he really didn't want to give it to us. But myself and one of the other members of the board, we just kept asking and asking and asking until finally we got it. We finished at midnight, one application. And we've had things like that before. You have to show that it's a unique hardship, that it's not something that applies throughout the district. Because if it applies throughout the district, the remedy isn't a variance, the remedy is rezoning from the town board.
Jim,
Yes,
do you have to have each of these reasons?
Yes.
Or one?
nope, all four.
Okay.
It cannot alter the essential character of the neighborhood. And it cannot be a self-created hardship. Those are the 4 factors for a use variance. The toughest one is that lack of a reasonable rate of return on the investment. That's the one where a lot of people get hung up. And we've had several use variance applications that we've considered over the years and that I've been on the board. And some have been approved and some have not. One of the things that my earlier experiences with zoning was one of my neighbors down the street, 2-story colonial with a slightly set back 2-car garage, and in between was a little family. And he was a guy, he did wonders with his property. And he wanted to put a Victorian porch, wraparound porch in the front of his house. Now, I live on a street, the only people who come on my street are either live there or they're lost. Nobody just drives by. So this isn't a high traffic area in town, it's a very small street, and he wanted to put a wraparound Victorian porch on the front of his house. And all the neighbors thought, what a great idea. And we went to the zoning board and we spoke in favor. There wasn't anybody who spoke in opposition. And then we sat around and the board deliberated, and the comment was made, well, if we let him do it, we'll have to let everybody do it. So they denied it. Well, years after that, I went to a presentation at the high school, Irondequoit High School, that Dr. Boyke, a psychologist in town, put on after Columbine. And he expressed the view that one of the factors that leads to situations like Columbine is that we went from a front porch society to a rear deck society. And I listened to that and I thought of my neighbor who wanted to build a front porch, where he and his wife and kids would be sitting out in the front at night as the neighbors walked their dogs by, and they'd say hi and everything. Dr. Boyke told the story of growing up along the Mississippi, being out past dark one night. He got spanked 3 times on the way home by women who were on the front porch. You know how upset your mother is? She's worried about you, bam, you know? And he got home, and then nowadays, he was saying, you know, people go away for a weekend, their kids leave their teenage kids home. There's 60 people over, there's all kinds of noise, partying and everything. Somebody calls and complains or comes up to them after they're back and say, do you know what was going on at your place last night? And the response more often than not today is, mind your own business. And that's what he was talking about. So I'm kind of pleased to tell you now that the zoning board, we've had a slightly philosophical shift. We now like front porches. We also like rear decks. We just don't like front decks that don't bear any resemblance to porches. So we may ask you to put, you know, a rail around or a roof over the top or something like that. The next thing we deal with is special use permits. And as I said earlier, this is the chicken realm. But we also had goats. There's a goat over in East Irondequoit, comes down for 5 or 6 months a year, and then goes up to the goat farm up near the St. Lawrence. But the kid goat comes down for 5 or 6 months and plays with the dogs, and the neighborhood kids all love it. But you need a special use permit. And I don't know who it was that came up with the idea that the zoning board is the place to decide what the rules are for having these animals in town. And I didn't even know that we did that until we got an application from somebody off of St. Paul who asked for a special use permit so he could keep his coati.
What's that?
It's a South American raccoon, and his pigs, and his monkey, and a couple other exotic animals. No tigers. And I went down to his place, I knocked on his door, and he invited me in. I expected to get overwhelmed by the smell from all these animals, and there was no smell. But he came in front of us, and he used these animals to do educational stuff in schools. So while I was standing there talking to him, the coati is on, I'm looking at where he houses them in his house. The coati is on the top of his shoulders, spread across. And I'm standing next to him like this. The next thing I know, the coati's front paws are on my right shoulder. And then he moves and he's now on my shoulder, while the monkey is climbing the shelves with the videos and pulling them out randomly and throwing them on the ground. And the pigs are running around in the backyard, And I'm thinking, this is like really weird, and who thought we knew anything about this? So he made lots of representations to us, we asked him lots of questions, and we ultimately granted him the variance. Well, then we started getting a lot of feedback from neighbors and other things that it wasn't really what it was cracked up to be in front of us.
He tricked you.
Well, he didn't trick us. He said he had, veterinarians who would be readily available to take care of these animals. The only problem we found out later was he'd never talked to those veterinarians, he just had a list of them. He said he had permits from the federal government and the state. Well, he'd applied for them, but he hadn't gotten them yet. And so somebody made an application to us, I forget who it was, somebody from the town, I think, for us to revoke his special use permit. So we had a hearing on that. And he comes in, and he's got his daughter with him, and his wife is with him, and he's got the monkey this time. And the monkey's sitting on his shoulder, and, and we're looking at this monkey, and, and it's like, yeah, okay, I don't want to throw the monkey out, but, we've got these problems. Well, then, one of the neighbors said that he was walking the monkey down the street one day, and the monkey bit one of the neighborhood kids.
Oh,
Right? And so I asked him about that. And he said, "Oh, that never happened." To which his wife turns to him and says, "Well, there was that time." And it's like, okay, here we go. So we revoked that permit, and
For all the animals at once?
all of them.
Oh, that's.
did he have to get rid of them?
Yes, he had to find other housing for them, which he did, as I understand.
Oh,
Not our problem, right? But that, if you watch our meetings, after we had that hearing where we found out that the information that he'd given us had not been accurate, I now swear in every applicant under oath, right? You promise to tell or affirm that everything you tell us tonight will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That way, if that situation occurs in the future, there are legal remedies that can be taken against the applicant. Whereas when we first granted that and we've learned about the problems, the town found out there was nothing they could do about the fact that his statements had not been accurate. So the special use permit is a use that the town has already determined is appropriate in the town. People come to us all the time. This isn't a farming place, we don't need chickens in Irondequoit, chickens don't belong in Irondequoit. Well, I'm sorry, the town board has said chickens are fine. The town board has said windmills are fine. The town board has said a lot of things are fine, but you have to have a special use permit. And what the special use permit does is allow us to frame conditions that make the use compatible or more compatible with the neighborhoods in which they are. So we've developed a whole list of conditions for chickens. You can only have 4. You can only have them for 5 years. If they die, you can't replace them. You have to have them looked at by a vet every year. You have to keep the food in closed containers indoors. You have to bury chicken wire 2 feet into the ground to prevent rodents from digging under to get to the chickens or the eggs. You can't let them roam in the yard. The coop has to be at least 8 feet from the rear, 8 feet from the nearest boundary. All these list of restrictions that we put in place. I'm driving home one night, it's dusk. I come up the street that's only like 2 blocks away from where I live. And I do a double take, I back up the car. There's 4 chickens running around the front yard. So I roll down the window and the woman's out there. And I said to her, I don't don't really mean to be a pain. I said, but I'm on the zoning board. Do you have a special use permit for those chickens? And I knew she didn't because at that point I'd already been on the board 10 years and I knew that we hadn't given her a permit.
Yeah.
Oh, they're not hurting anybody, she says. I said, well, that really doesn't matter. You need to just go to the town and get the special use permit. And she never filed an application. I haven't seen the chickens there since either, and I don't think she lives there anymore. But we've told people, and we don't allow roosters.
Oh, yeah.
Roosters are not allowed in Irondequoit.
Those are noisy.
Yes,
5:30 in the morning.
Oh, okay.
and somebody recently came in front of us and had chickens and a rooster and wanted us to give him a variance. And I said to him, well, that chicken has to be gone by tomorrow.
The rooster.
The rooster. He said, I don't know where I'm gonna take him. I said, well, I have a suggestion. If you can't figure out any other way, you know what you're having for dinner. There are several horses in Irondequoit. We approved a horse off of List Avenue, trying to think of the name of it's not Van Voorhees.
Now, Hill.
Nob Hill, there's a little driveway that goes between two houses and it goes back into this rather large property that has a little corral with a little barn. And we approved them to house 2 horses on that property. And they take them and ride them through the park or whatever, but there are other horses in town as well. So we get those kinds of things. And then the other thing that we have is we have appellate jurisdiction. So when Mr. Merrick was the fire marshal and decided that the use that the new owner of the old Turkish building on Culver Road wanted to put it to was a non-permitted use as a funeral home, the owner appealed to us his ruling, saying that he was wrong and we should allow her to use it the way she wanted to, which was basically as a facility to have meals and stuff for wakes after funerals and all that. And so our jurisdiction on that is like an appeals court. It's not our call to decide whether or not he's right or wrong. Our call is, does his decision have a basis? Is it a reasonable interpretation of the town code? If it is, we affirm. If it isn't, we reverse. We affirm. I don't know what it's being used for now. I think it's gone over to some other use. I think it's a day center now.
Irondequoit food cover's going in there.
Oh, is that where they're going?
Yeah.
Okay, I knew they were moving, but I wasn't sure where. So, I could go on, but I was told that I should stop after about an hour, so I'll stop. But if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
The Dunkin' Donuts, why is it, I mean, I think I know the answer, but why there's not much food, how full into the Dunkin' Donuts, rich and.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Dunkin' Donuts. I will tell you about Dunkin' Donuts. The question for us with Dunkin' Donuts was, given the dimensions of the lot and the requirements of the town code, essentially nothing other than the pre-existing non-conforming gas station could be built there. And gas stations have all kinds of issues. So having something other than a gas station was a beneficial improvement to the neighborhood. The traffic is a problem, but there are solutions to that I've suggested that I don't think will go anywhere because not many people listen to what I have to say. But my theory is if they take those Jersey concrete barriers that they use for blocking off, like when they're doing construction and they want to block off a lane to work on it and they move those concrete things in, if they run those down to the front door of the funeral home on Portland, you eliminate the biggest problem, which is people trying to turn left into Dunkin' Donuts from Portland. But for some reason, nobody wants to take me up on that suggestion.
Did they consider the traffic when they,
Well, there was a traffic study that told us, that it wouldn't be, be a major detriment to traffic. And that was some expert who came in and gave an opinion. So, an area variance is just a substantial hardship. It's not as strict as a use variance. And the plan, as it was presented to us, we modified a few things, was reasonable. So we approved it. And yes, I do still hear about it regularly.
especially when you drive and the car's turning
Oh,
left?
I've been inconvenienced by it myself, and I've heard the voices in the back of my head. Whoever approved that?
It's good coffee.
I don't even think they let you in, do they?
What?
The Dunkin' Donuts, so they don't even let you in anymore.
Where, on the street?
In the building. They don't let you hang out or sit now.
Oh, I think they do. I think they're back open again.
They open.
Yeah.
I looked in there and nobody's ever in there.
Well, no.
Oh, they're always
it's
in
mostly
driving.
a drive-through place from what I've seen. But I've met with people in Dunkin' Donuts at
Oh, they
that
like
corner.
it back? Oh. I didn't,
Other questions?
I know.
You still playing trombone?
I used to.
Oh, you don't want to hear my trombone.
I don't, I just.
No, it would, you know how a cow that's suffering from some ailment would sound more symphonic than my trombone. But I'm thinking about getting back to it, yes.
So I have a real question.
Yes,
Sometimes I don't understand the hierarchy of what group has authority to say something over another. And what I'm talking to specifically is 2 months ago or so, there was a big issue about Jeremiah's on the corner of Cooper and Titus.
yep,
Yeah,
That is zoned mixed-use commercial on the east side of Cooper, all the way down to Hedgebury. So there's, the Titus Tavern and 4 or 5 houses. Once that was declared a local historic landmark, which I don't get after I walked around it and looked at the rubble that's around, are there options? Does the zoning board trump that? Do they trump?
we don't have anything to do with that. Neither does the planning board. That when the historical, I'm not sure what it's called, historical board, historical commission, whatever, preservation.
Commission.
I was watching that meeting and fell asleep about 9:15. And I was listening to the arguments, thinking to myself, and again, I'm speaking for myself and not as any representative of the town. To me, that was a horrendous decision. It impeded progress on that corner. It deprived us of the potential for a really nice opportunity. One of the problems that the zoning board has a really collegial relationship, because Russ Thomas, if anyone knows Russ Thomas or knows who he was, he used to be on the zoning board. And when I first joined the board, Russ was already serving his first term. And one of the first things that I was told was, well, when we're done meeting, we go over to Murph's. And we get together for some wings and some social time. And so our board, because we would do that after our meetings, we got to know each other, we get along really well. And, we have a good camaraderie. Every July, the zoning board and the planning board meet on the same nights. And we have the same attorney. And of course, the zoning board gets the big room and the planning board gets the small room. It's appropriate in my view. And so our attorney would shift back and forth between the two boards to see if there were any things that he needed to take up. And then afterwards, he had us all over to his place. And we had wings and an opportunity to socialize. And what I noticed was, our board, we hung out with each other, we talked to each other. The planning board members kind of like staked out their own little territory. Nobody talked to each other. They didn't have any real interaction or anything. And I thought, geez, why is that? And then I thought, I know the answer. The answer is MERS. Well, now that COVID hit, restaurant, you can't find a place. on a Monday night in Irondequoit, where you can do that. And I was looking forward to the opportunity that Jeremiah's might present. And I just the other night when I met the supervisor, and I still think everybody thinks I'm kidding, I said, we need to change our meeting night. Because we need to be on a night when there's a place open in town where we can socialize after. That's what makes our board special. Oh, well. But yeah, that was a horrendous decision in my view.
That building isn't anything special about it.
So people have suggested that perhaps the owner should arrange for a runaway semi-truck to run off the road into the building. It's been pointed out to me that the people who have been in the building say that it's falling apart inside. It hasn't been maintained in years. The Titus Tavern lease is going to be up, as I understand it, later this year. The owner, I'm sure, isn't going to renew it. And if this building was so historic, why didn't anybody complain when Titus Tavern was making all those renovations to the outside and completely changing the building, adding a deck in front and everything else? I mean, where was the hue and cry over that? I think what it boiled down to, and again, this is my personal opinion, was that the owner wouldn't talk to a few people who have a very close affinity with that area of town and think that their group is the one who ought to be making the decisions about what goes on there or doesn't. Again, that's my personal opinion.
Could you talk just a little bit about the history of changes in the zoning rules? Are they you talked about the 50s and the 60s and the 2000s. Is it ad hoc? Or is it periodically reviewed? And is anything coming up
Yes.
soon? Like, are they?
Yes. Yes to all three.
Thank you.
All right? There are some that are ad hoc. They do periodic reviews. And I understand they're doing another periodic review and maybe making some changes in the near future. They've asked for input.
Who's the town board?
The town administration, yeah, the supervisor, the folks in the building and zoning department. One of the things I think, we get a lot of applications for corner lots, right? Because, it works a lot better when you use the right side. You gotta, I'll use the house that's next to me, all right? Here's the garage. Here's the front door. Deck and family room back there. Where's the front?
Where's the street?
Well, it's a corner lot. There's two streets.
Oh, it has.
Where the front door is?
Narrow.
So where do you think, that this is the front door, this is the driveway and the garage. What would you call the front of that house?
The side.
This side, right?
Yeah. No.
Nope. Town code says the narrowest side, that's the front. All right? So when somebody has a house like this, and they want to use this part of the yard, and they want to fence it in. And they want to put up a 6-foot fence to protect their kids and keep their dogs from running around the neighborhood. The town ordinance says they can only have 30 feet total of fence in the front yard, and it can't be higher than 3.5 feet, and it has to be of an open style, like a picket fence or a, fence. No, not even a board on board, because that's not an open fence. Board on board is closed. So we get lots of variance requests with corner lots. So one of the things that I suggested is revise the definition of corner lots so that at least comports with what the practical reality of the lot is. Another thing though, because, and this gets brought up to me regularly, the 6-foot picket fences on List Avenue that are back to back, Those are rear yard fences, and they're fine. So. Yes,
I wanted to ask, what is the address of that house?
He's not gonna tell
Because
you.
the address should tell you what street it's on. Oh, yeah, so,
my house is 103, this is 115.
okay, so that should be the front then.
Oh no, one night, I'm in bed, knock on my front door. I look out, the guy kind of looks like one of my clients that I know well enough that it wouldn't surprise me that he's at my house at 11:15. So I open the door a little bit and then I realize it's not him. And the guy says, "I got your chicken for you." And I'm like, "My chicken?" So now I'm thinking this is some kind of scam this guy's trying to get into my house. So I close the door, I say, "See ya," close the door, lock it. I immediately get on the phone to 911 to say, the guy at my door trying to get into my house saying he has chicken for me, right? And they send a police officer over and I give them the description of the way the guy went. I'd never heard of DoorDash before. But the next morning, I saw my neighbor and she's complaining. My chicken never arrived last night. I had to go out myself to get it, you know, what's the good of all this stuff? I'm like, "Oh, really? There was somebody delivering chicken to you last night?" "Well, they showed up at my door, I called the police." She got a big kick out of that, and then just a couple weeks ago, we came home, and sitting on our front step was a bag of Popeye's takeout. And having caught on to this DoorDash and the fact that my neighbor uses it, I picked up the bag, I walked around, but her car wasn't in the driveway, she'd left, she works nights, she'd already left for work.
You ate it.
We did. We enjoyed it. I was like, hey, you know, never look a gift horse in the mouth.
Or a chicken.
Yeah.
So Jim, back to the special, or the variance, the area variance. I mean, what is like the percentage that you would give? If somebody wanted to completely, the whole yard, you know, pave it over, 100% they wanted to do. I mean, what is the percentage over the?
Well, it's funny you should ask that, because most of my backyard is paved over with paving stones. And my front yard has paving stones and a variety of plants and no grass anywhere. And anything that's on the ground level is not regulated by the town code. You can have a deck that's within a foot of the ground, and that's fine.
No, I mean for a building.
Building, there are percentages that are set out depending upon the district. So you can only occupy, for example, the guy down in Somerville, he wanted, I think the restriction was 25%
I was at that
of
meeting.
the lot size, and he wanted 28 or something, I forget
No,
what.
he wanted 38.
Was it 38, then was it 35? Because it wasn't that big a variation.
So what if you wanted 40%? I mean, I guess, how
That's-
do you sort of?
It's a judgment call based on what he wants to do.
Yeah.
The only reason that there were two factors that led to his need for a larger percentage.
Right.
The first was that he wanted to build a house that would be reasonably, usable as a single-family residence. And he only wanted to build it the same dimensions as the guy next door, but the guy next door had a bigger lot, so the smaller the lot, the larger the percentage of occupancy is gonna be by the same size structure. There's no hard and fast formula. We look at everything on its individually and then in the context of the neighborhood.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Now, what do you do about fences and the dogs jump over and things like that, and then they, come after you, or?
We don't have anything to do with that, other than if they ask for a fence to keep their dog in, then we might give them the fence.
I can't do anything about that kind of thing?
I guess you'd call the animal control. We don't have anything to do other than chickens and goats and koalas and things like that. We don't have anything to do with animals.
You don't zone the dog front for the fences for
You
the
can only
dog
have
front?
2 dogs, right?
You don't.
2 or 3, yes. But you can get a permit from the police chief
That's different.
that lets you have 3 or more. Hmm?
The dog can't have to.
I don't know who decided that the police chief was the one to give permits for dogs.
Animal control is under the police department.
Hmm?
Animal control is under the authority of the police department.
Thank you for clarifying that.
What's the history of enforcement?
That depends on who you ask.
History of what? You said?
Enforcement. I just was meeting a client for breakfast the other morning, and somebody in the booth next recognized me and said, "When you're done, I need to talk to you for a minute." So I went over and he was talking to me all about the fact that animal control and the police won't do anything about the neighbors' dogs that are barking all night long and everything else. And I said, "Look, I don't know what to tell you. There's a new chief, talk to the new chief. I'm sure if the chief finds out I sent him to him, he might not be happy with me, but, you know, I mean, it's an issue, and I don't know a lot about, what the enforcement is.
No zoning enforcement.
Zoning enforcement?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, what's the history of that?
code enforcement, yes, they go out and enforce that. If something's brought to their attention, that's frequently how we get, applications for variances, is that the code enforcement officers, somebody like a neighbor or somebody will call in a complaint, and then they'll, go out and look at it, and they'll say, "Oh, this isn't in compliance with the code, you either have to take this fence down," or whatever it might be, or get a variance, and then it'll generate a variance application, and we'll have a sheet that gives us the history of the complaints.
I have a quick question about ramps. If somebody, let's say theoretically, you have somebody broke their leg, right? And they are in bad shape because of a bad break, and they're gonna need, I don't know, 3 months, or 4 months to recover, and they gotta put a temporary ramp outside. Is that considered an issue that would be before your board?
Wouldn't come in front of us, I'm not sure, I don't think
A temporary ramp?
that requires anything, but my advice to anyone who's thinking of doing something like that is call the planning and building department at the town, and they'll tell you if you need a permit or anything. Years ago, my steps were falling apart in front of my house. All the masons that I talked to, none of them, they were gonna put red brick in front of my gray stone front, and I'm like, nah, that'll stick out like a sore thumb. So I came up with this idea that I'd just cover the steps with pressure treated wood and stain it gray. So I went over to the town. This is before I was on the board. Went over to the town and I said, "This is my problem, this is what I want to do. Do I need a permit?" "Well, are you repairing your steps or are you building new steps?" I said, "Well, my steps are falling apart, I want to cover it with pressure treated wood, just, surround it so that it's functional, but I don't really want to take out what's there." "Well, are you repairing the steps or are you building new?" And I said, "Well, what's the difference?" "Well, if you're repairing steps, you don't need a permit. If you're building new, you need a permit." I said, "Well, I guess I'm repairing my steps."
There you go.
So, I don't know that you would need any permit to put in a temporary or even a permanent ramp. I would suspect that the Disabilities Act
Right,
would supersede the town code
exactly.
on that.
Can I just interject something there for you?
You may interject, this is a very knowledgeable individual in the audience, knows more than I do.
Oh, no. You've done a great job there tonight. But having been an employee of the town and working out of the building department at one time, the only purpose for permits is to protect you, like Jim was saying. What if you sell the house and there's a structure there and it wasn't put into code? For example, you didn't go below frost line when you put in a front porch or a deck, and it starts to heave on a really cold night, and then it pulls the foundation out. Now, you bought the house from me, and after you sign the paperwork, whatever you purchased is now your problem. Even if I didn't get a permit for it and didn't do it legally, I did it to make it look nice. I wanted to get cheap because I wanted to get out. And so you buy the problem with the property. Or if there's any underground tanks, we had a lot of this where homes that once had oil or coal, but the oil tanks underground, now they got a gas furnace because they brought gas lines down the street. and they didn't get permits to change the fuel source. Not a big deal, didn't bother me, except for when you went to sell the house, and then all of a sudden there was an oil leak in the front lawn, and you had to have that taken out. Now that's all kinds of permits, it's from the DEC, now you're talking state, maybe federal. So on the handicap, yes, the American Disability Act requires ramps to be at a certain level. McDonald's has a company out of Pennsylvania that every time they do a renovation on one of their stores, comes out and measures and shoots the laser on all of their handicap accessibility. Because if it's not in compliance, they rip it out and redo it. And that's because there are people that go around, here's a part-time job for you. There are people that go around the country and they'll pull into a hick town and they got a convenience store and it's got a handicap sign, but the ramp doesn't meet the criteria. They throw $1 million lawsuit against the company saying, that's not in compliance, I can't get up that ramp, or I got hurt getting up that ramp, you owe me $1 million, they settle out of court for $100,000 or $50,000.
Right.
If you do that 3 times a year, you're making $150,000.
Oh, the trampoline.
Well, you asked about enforcement. There's 2 enforcement stories of zoning that I can share with you. The first one, what I learned about in law school, there was a contractor who was building an apartment complex out in one of the suburbs of Syracuse. And he did not get along well with the town, and the town did not like him. So he came into the zoning board out there and he got variances that let him build, let's say, 8 feet from the side lot line. Well, he went ahead and built it. And when the building was done, he was 7.5 feet from the side lot line. So he was 1/2 foot short. So he came back in front of the board and said, well, look, I built it, and I built it wrong, and it's 1/2 foot off. Can you change my variance from 8 feet to 7.5 feet? They told him no. Move the building. It's gotta be 8 feet. Well, he sued them, and the appellate court said, move the building. And then there was a lawyer out in Skinny Atlas who was having a fight with the zoning board and the town authorities. And he went ahead and built a really nice lakefront house on a piece of property that wasn't zoned for what he put there. And he refused to take it down. The town brought in a bulldozer and leveled it. And if you remember the Canisius Inn?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm getting the high sign. The Canisius Inn, if you go to where the Canisius is today, there's iron steel girders that are up in the air because they got variances to build something. Then they started building it not in accordance with the plans. They got a cease and desist order, and they refused to change it, and the town refused to let them finish it. So it sits there as a monument to zoning enforcement.
Like the handicap ramp, although you may not need a permit, you should probably get one because they'll verify that the contractor is insured and they'll verify that it meets the ramp, because if it gets approved by the town, it's gotta be in compliance. Somebody gets hurt, they can sue the town saying, you knew it was there, it was in my front yard, the town may not have known it was there.
We get people all the time who tell us, oh, well, my fencing contractor never told me that I needed this, that, or the other thing, or that I couldn't put a fence up like that. And our response is, well, if you'd called the town before you put the fence up, you would have known.
And always check for contractor's insurance, there's a lot of people that do this part-time on the side, and if they get hurt on your property, your homeowner's insurance pays for their disability.
It's like that Geico ad, right, or Allstate, or remember the guy who sows chaos?
Oh, yeah.